Welcome to Aircraft, your gateway to thrilling HFY sci-fi stories where humanity stands strong among the stars. Here, you'll experience epic encounters with alien civilizations, moments of human courage, intelligence, and the unstoppable spirit that makes humanity unique. Every story on this channel is narrated by a real human voice, not AI, bringing you a more authentic and immersive storytelling experience. If you love sci-fi adventures and stories where humanity proves its worth in the universe, you're in the right place. Let's start the story.
There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when someone has been underestimated for the very last time. Not the silence of defeat, not the silence of someone finally breaking under the weight of cruelty. The other kind, the kind that comes after the cruelty is done, after the laughter has dried up, after the ones who threw the stones look up and realize very slowly that the thing they were throwing stones at was never flinching because it was weak. It was flinching because it was being merciful. Her name was Devi. She sat in the third row of Xenocultural Integration Seminar 7 aboard the Conclave Station Valharith, and she was the only human in the room, and she had been laughed at twice this morning already, and she was taking notes in a battered paper journal that no one else on the station even understood the function of, and she had not said a single word in her own defense. The Conclave had 47 species in it. Humanity had been admitted 11 standard years ago. Humanity was still on probation. She was there to prove that humans could learn, could sit still, could participate in galactic civilization without breaking something. She had not told anyone what she'd broken before. The morning it started, the morning Devi's classmates decided she was a curiosity rather than a peer, began with a question about conflict resolution. Professor Cythera was Valharithi, which meant she had 7 sensory tendrils arranged like a crown above her primary optical cluster, and she communicated in harmonic layering, which the translation matrix rendered into something resembling speech. She was brilliant. She was also, in a way that many brilliant creatures are, completely certain of the boundaries of the universe she inhabited. She posed a question to the class the way one poses a question when one already knows the answer, and is testing whether the students have done their reading. The Marin conflict of the Fourth Rim, she said. 1,400 cycles of territorial dispute between the Marin Shoal nations and the Veth Dominion. Standard resolution models all failed. The Conclave's own mediators withdrew after the 7th attempt. What finally ended it? A student near the window, Preth, a young Valharithi with iridescent blue tendrils, recited from memory. The Conclave's binding protocol. Mutual resource partition. Standard framework 7 Delta. Signed in the 32nd cycle of the Concordance. Correct, said Cythera. Devi, in the third row, did not look up from her journal. Her pen moved. She had written something in the margin beside the official answer, but no one could see what. Preth turned to look at her. Most of the class had developed a habit of doing this, glancing at Devi whenever a question was answered to see what the human was reacting to. Humans were new. Humans were, by most assessments, still being evaluated. There was a particular flavor of academic contempt that manifested not as hostility, but as a kind of eager curiosity, the way one watches an unfamiliar animal attempt a task designed for a different body type. Does the human have a note to add? Preth asked in the tone that was not technically rude and was definitely rude. A few tendrils flickered in what the translation matrix flagged as amusement. Debbie looked up. She had a round face and dark eyes and the kind of stillness that people mistake for having nothing going on inside. Her jacket was navy, worn at the elbows. Her journal had a rubber band around it. She looked at Preth, then at the professor, then back at her journal. No, she said. The human takes notes by hand, said another student. Vorith, a Gethli whose bioluminescent skin flickered pale yellow. Curiosity amusement, in their species' chromatic language, on organic material sheets. With a pigment applicator. It's called a pen, Devi said. Does it interface with the station's data network? No. Then, what is the purpose of storage, Devi said. Memory. The act of writing something down changes how you retain it. It's tactile encoding. She paused. It's a human thing. The yellow on Vorth's skin shifted warmer. Not malicious. Genuinely puzzled, in the way a child is puzzled by an adult's inexplicable attachment to an old, broken object. Cythera moved the seminar forward. And Devi looked back at her journal, and in a margin beside the official account of the Marin conflict, she had written, "That's not what ended it." She did not share this. She had learned 11 years ago when humanity first sent diplomatic cohorts in a conclave space. Learn it the way you learn things that cost something, that the moment you correct the official record, you stop being a curiosity and start being a problem. Curiosities are tolerated. Problems are managed. She was here to learn. That was the assignment. Sit down. Take your notes. Prove that humans can function in a room without destabilizing it. She was very good at sitting down. She had done a great deal of it recently. It was a recent development. The seminar ran another 2 standard hours. They covered the conclave's standard conflict resolution matrices, the 7 recognized frameworks, each one a product of thousands of cycles of interspecies diplomacy, each one tested against the archive of recorded galactic conflicts, and found sufficient. The frameworks were elegant. Sethera was clearly proud of them. The students engaged with intelligent enthusiasm. Devi filled 6 pages of her journal. In the margins, Framework 3 assumes both parties assign equal weight to material loss. They don't always. Depends on ceremonial valuation of territory versus extract evaluation. In the margins, Framework 5 requires a neutral third party with no prior alliance history. There are currently 4 species with no prior alliance history to anyone. One of them is humans. Note, we are not considered neutral. We are considered unpredictable. Same practical outcome, different reason. In the margins, beside a diagram of the standard 7-delta mediation structure. This works when both parties want a solution. Most conflicts I've seen, at least one party doesn't want a solution. They want the conflict. The framework doesn't account for that. She closed the journal when the seminar ended, slid the rubber band back around it. Preth was waiting near the exit. The human's name is Devi? Preth asked, not unfriendly, still with that quality of observational interest. Yes. You've been in the program for how long? 3 rotations. 4. And your specialization? Devi slung her bag over one shoulder. Conflict resolution. The tendrils above Preth's optical cluster did something complex. You want to be a mediator? A human mediator? Is that surprising? Humans have been the conclave for 11 years, Preth said, with the tone of someone being patient. You don't have. I mean, there's no precedent. There's no track record. Mediators require credibility. Parties in a dispute have to believe the mediator has standing. What standing does a human have? No offense intended. None taken, Devi said. She walked out. She did not say, I brokered the end of the Aneth-Kavar border crisis in my 2nd year in the field. She did not say, I was the human who talked the Shoal Nation separatists off the Rim Station siege before the Velharathi response fleet arrived. She did not say, there's a word in the Dominion's official record, a human word imported directly into their diplomatic lexicon because they had no equivalent. That means the refusal to treat a solvable problem as if it were a permanent condition. And that word is mine. She walked back to her quarters on level 12 of the student residential section, which smelled of recycled air and the faint mineral tang that all Velharathi station architecture carried. And she sat on the edge of her bunk, and she opened her journal to a fresh page, and she wrote the date. Then she wrote day 112. They still don't know. Good. Then she sat with that for a while. The reason she was here in a student's seminar, sitting in the 3rd row while Velharathi teenagers recited Framework 7 Delta from memory, the reason she was here instead of anywhere else required some context. The kind of context she didn't offer, not anymore. 11 years ago, when the Conclave extended its first cautious invitation to the newly contacted species in Sector 7 Gamma, the species colloquially known to everyone else as the Earth People, there was significant debate about what role humans could play in the galactic community. Most of the Conclave species arrived at membership after centuries of gradual contact, trading, slow integration. They had long track records, known quantities. You could look at a Velharathi and know, with high confidence, how they would respond to a given diplomatic situation. Same with the Gethalai. Same with the Marin. Humans arrived, as they apparently did everything, at a rate and in a manner that no one had predicted, and the debate about what to do with them had not been brief. The consensus that emerged was limited integration. Probationary status. Humans could participate in conclave institutions, could attend conclave academies, could enter the diplomatic corps, but under oversight, under mentorship from established species, under the understanding that humanity's track record within the conclave was, as yet, too short to extend full credibility. This was reasonable. Debbie thought it was reasonable. She had thought so even before she understood, personally and professionally, why the conclave was so careful. What the conclave did not fully understand, what most people here did not understand, looking at the human girl with the paper journal sitting in the third row, was that humanity had not spent its 11 probationary years sitting quietly. Some of them had been sitting quietly. Some of them had been in the field. Debbie had been in the field for 9 of those 11 years. She had been recalled 8 months ago. The recall had been polite. The recall had also been, in diplomatic terms, fairly firm. And so she was here in Seminar 7, learning the frameworks that she had spent 9 years discovering the edges of in the field while conflict happened to real people in real time, and the frameworks were beautiful and elegant and frequently insufficient, and she was not going to say that out loud in Sethera's class because that was not why she was here. She was here because someone had decided, at a level several layers above her pay grade, that the human with the unusual field record needed to be put through formal credentialing before she was deployed again. Paperwork, legitimacy, track record in an official context. She understood this. She did not enjoy it. She was trying. The second mockery of the morning came at the midday meal. The station's communal food hall was a wide, low-ceilinged space that smelled of 17 different species, chemical metabolic byproducts all mixed together, which was not pleasant for anyone, but was equally unpleasant for everyone, which the conclave considered a kind of rough democracy. Debbie ate at a corner table. She had a tray of protein composites and what the synthesizer optimistically called Earth-adjacent carbohydrates, which bore a distant family resemblance to rice the way a photograph of the ocean bears a distant family resemblance to swimming in it. Vorith and 2 others, a Marin exchange student named Keth and an older Valharathi postgraduate whose name Debbie had not learned yet, settled nearby. Not with her, near her, in a way that students settle near an unusual exhibit. She's using the tactile pigment device again, Keth observed. The Marin were crustacean adjacent, their speaking apparatus rendered into standard in a way that always sounded slightly clipped. Keth's carapace was dark amber, which in Marin chromatics signified a student-rank scholar. Young, eager to sort things into categories. She does it constantly, Vorith said, even at meals. Debbie was, in fact, writing in her journal with one hand and eating with the other. This was not a difficult maneuver. She had eaten in considerably more complicated circumstances. The human's brain is structured differently, the older Valharathi said. Debbie had not looked up, but she could track conversations through the translation matrix in her ear without appearing to attend to them, a skill she had not disclosed. Homo sapiens process information through multiple parallel channels. The manual activity may be a method of, I'm speculating, preventing one channel from interfering with another. That sounds inefficient, Keth said. It sounds very inefficient, Vorith agreed. It works, the older Valharathi said neutrally. She's in conflict resolution, Keth said, with the specific tone of someone who has just looked something up and finds the results surprising in a condescending way. She wants to be a mediator, a human mediator. The clicking of Keth's speaking apparatus carried a timbre that was, in Marin, the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Who would accept mediation from a human? What's the logic? You'd sit across from a human in a dispute arbitration and think this creature species has been in space for 11 years. They barely have a history. Why would I accept their judgment over a Valharathi mediator with 300 cycles of institutional credibility behind them? Vorith finished. Right. It doesn't track. Debbie turned a page. She wrote, Framework 3, Subclause on Valuative Asymmetry. Cross-reference, Nth Caver. The Caver delegations valued the northern extraction rights at roughly 2.3x what their own economic models predicted because of ceremonial ancestral claim, a factor that doesn't exist in the framework's model at all. Solution came through finding a Caver cultural mechanism that allowed them to symbolically retain the claim while legally transferring the rights. You have to know what the thing means to them, not what it's worth. She ate a bite of rice-adjacent carbohydrate. She wrote, They're not wrong that I don't have institutional credibility. They're measuring the wrong thing. The older Valharathi, she caught his name from the room's ambient registration system, Velsharith, visiting lecturer, was still talking. Credibility in mediation isn't purely institutional, he said, with the tone of someone correcting a student while trying not to seem like they're correcting a student. It derives from demonstrated capacity, from results. A mediator who has resolved conflicts earns standing regardless of their species' tenure in the community. Has the human resolved conflicts? Keth asked. Silence. Vorth's skin flickered uncertain green. No one knew. Her official file listed her field posting vaguely. Diplomatic Support Specialist, Human Integration Bureau, Sector Operations, which was technically accurate. The way a description of water as 2 hydrogens and an oxygen is technically accurate. I don't know, Velshareth said. Her record is, there's not much detail. Humans are often opaque about their operational history. Institutional humility, possibly, given their probationary status. Or there isn't much record because there isn't much to record, Keth said. Devi finished her food, closed her journal, slid the rubber band back on, picked up her tray. She paused near their table on the way to the return station. Not confrontationally, just near enough to be real. The Marin conflict, she said to no one in particular, the way you say something to the air when you're thinking. Framework 7 Delta. Mutual resource partition. It's a clean answer. She looked at Keth for a moment. Keth's carapace amber shifted slightly. Uncertainty. The partition held for 40 cycles, Devi said. Then, the Shoal Nation's eastern tributary dried up. Changed the resource calculation. Framework didn't have a renegotiation clause because the original negotiators assumed the physical geography was stable. She paused. It's a good framework. Geography was the variable no one priced in. She put her tray in the return slot and left. Behind her, she heard Velshareth say, in a tone she had heard before, a tone she associated with the specific moment when someone recalibrates a prior assumption. She did not look back. In her journal, later, she did not write about the conversation. She wrote instead about framework failure modes. She wrote about the gap between the map and the territory. She wrote, the frameworks are built for the conflicts we've already seen. The useful part of the job is the ones we haven't. She wrote, 112 days. This is fine. I can do this. She crossed out the last line. She wrote, I can do this. For pages later, in smaller handwriting, like a thing she was telling herself quietly rather than recording for any record. There are 23 unresolved territorial disputes in the Conclave's current active file. I've read all of them. 3 of them are going to escalate within the next 2 standard years if no one intervenes. I've identified the intervention points. I've written the preliminary analysis. No one has asked me for it. I am sitting in the 3rd row. I'm taking notes. She held the pen still for a moment, the tip hovering above the page. I am being very patient. The pen moved. The Shoal Nation crisis is going to break in 18 months. I've seen the economic indicators. I know what the escalation pattern looks like. I know because I've seen it before. I know because I was there last time. I am in Seminar 7. I'm being very patient. Somewhere on the station, 47 species went about their days. The Conclave's great machinery of civilization turned and hummed. In the conflict resolution offices on Level 31, experienced Vel-Herathi mediators with 300 cycles of institutional credibility reviewed the active files and made their assessments. Devi closed her journal. The rubber band snapped back. Day 112. The crisis broke in 11 months, not 18. Devi had been wrong about the timeline. She was not wrong about the crisis. The Shoal Nation Compact and the Rim's sovereignty, a territorial dispute that the Conclave had quietly classified as monitored low priority for the past 3 years, went from monitored to active in the span of 6 days. The trigger was a mining incident. There was always a trigger, and the trigger was always, in Devi's experience, not the actual problem. The way a cracked window is not the storm. The actual problem was that the Compact's new administration had come to power on a platform of resource nationalism, and the Rim Sovereignty Treaty Council had simultaneously elected a block of expansionists. And 2 bodies of political pressure had been building toward each other for 2 years while the Conclave's active file kept it classified as low priority because its existing economic interdependence metrics suggested conflict was irrational. Conflict is always irrational. Devi had once written in a different journal, years ago, in a field posting on the edge of the 3rd rim. That's not what the parties are doing it for. The station went to elevated alert status. Level 3, which on Velhareth meant that diplomatic communications were prioritized, senior staff were recalled from leave, and students in the residential levels were advised to remain in their quarters unless their expertise was needed. Debbie stayed in her quarters for approximately 45 minutes. Then, she walked to level 31. The conflict resolution offices were not, under normal circumstances, accessible to students. They were under elevated alert status, very busy, and not entirely monitoring who was accessing the floor via the service corridor that ran alongside the environmental maintenance systems, which Debbie had located on her third day aboard the station because locating secondary access routes was a habit she had built so deep it no longer felt like a decision. She did not go into the main offices. She sat in the corridor outside, cross-legged on the floor, journal open, and she listened through the office walls, which were not well soundproofed, a construction cost-saving that had probably seemed trivial when the station was built. And she took notes. The Conclave's senior mediators were attempting to apply Framework 3. Debbie's pen moved. Then, they pivoted to Framework 5, which required a neutral third party, and she heard someone mention the 4 species that qualified as neutral, and she heard the problem immediately. All 4 of them had existing resource agreements with the compact. Technically neutral, practically complicated. She wrote, they're going to go with a Velharathi lead mediator. Sethera's caste, probably, the harmonic arbitration tradition. Strong on procedure. Less strong on the thing no one in there is currently talking about, which is that the compact's lead negotiator is Shoal Nation Old Guard, meaning his ceremonial obligations to the Kethvar territorial right will prevent him from signing any document that doesn't include a specific linguistic acknowledgement of the Shoal Nation's primacy claim. It doesn't have to be legally binding. He just has to be able to go home and say the words were said. Framework 3 doesn't have that mechanism. Framework 3 doesn't know that mechanism exists. She turned a page. The Rim Sovereignty, on the other side, has a different problem. Their expansionist bloc doesn't actually want resolution. They want the appearance of attempted resolution followed by breakdown, which they'll use domestically to justify the resource seizure they've already approved internally. I know this because the economic modeling their Treaty Council released last cycle doesn't make sense unless you assume they've already priced in the seizure. To stop this, you need to make the breakdown more expensive than the seizure. You don't do that through the negotiation. You do that by finding what the expansionist bloc's actual domestic constituency values, which in this case, based on the Rim Sovereignty's internal political structure, is shipping lane security in the outer bands, and making those lanes feel suddenly fragile in a way that can be stabilized only through successful resolution. You don't threaten them. You make the vulnerability visible. They threaten themselves. I have a contact in the outer band shipping registry. I've had her for 6 years. I could call her in about 20 minutes. Debbie stopped writing. She looked at what she'd written. She was in a service corridor. She was on probation in a student program, under the specific terms of which she was not supposed to be conducting independent diplomatic operations. She looked at her journal. The pen tapped twice against the page. She heard, through the wall, one of the senior mediators say the compact delegation is refusing to confirm their negotiating team. We don't know who they're sending yet. And another voice. If they send Vareth, we're in trouble. Vareth won't sign anything with Framework 3 language. He never does. And the first voice again, does anyone have experience with Vareth specific? No, I didn't think so. He's old Shoal Nation ceremonial tradition. We need someone who knows the Kethvar, right architecture. I don't know if we have that. Silence on the other side of the wall. The kind of silence that, in a room full of intelligent beings with centuries of combined experience, means none of us know this particular thing. Debbie's pen stopped tapping. She looked at her journal, at the page where she had written 9 months ago in a different context, Kethvar territorial right, primacy acknowledgement as prerequisite, not legally binding, linguistic only. See, NF-Caver resolution, subclause 7, which is why it worked when Framework 3 said it shouldn't. She looked at the wall. She stood up. She straightened her jacket. She thought about this for approximately 12 seconds. She knocked on the office door. The silence on the other side reconfigured into the specific quality of silence that means someone is here who should not be here. The door opened. A Velharathi she didn't recognize, senior rank, tendrils held in the formal authority configuration. This floor is restricted during alert status. I know, Debbie said. I'm a student. I'm sorry to interrupt. She was not sorry. She was making herself sound like she was sorry. This was a skill. I heard you mention Vareth. The tendrils shifted. You were listening through. The soundproofing isn't great. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was sitting in the corridor because I couldn't sleep. She was lying about that part. She was doing it calmly. Vareth. I've worked with him. Another long pause. She counted 4 people in the room from her vantage at the doorway. 2 Velherathi, 1 Githali, 1 species she didn't immediately recognize. All of them looking at her. She recognized the specific quality of a look. A human student in the corridor claiming to know a senior Shoal Nation ceremonial diplomat. You've worked with Vareth, one of them said, in the tone of someone repeating an implausible sentence to verify they'd heard it correctly. In the Aneth Caver negotiation, I was in the support team. I was field attached. She paused. I know the Kethvar, right architecture. I know what he needs to be able to say to be able to sign. It doesn't have to be in the main document. It can be in a parallel ceremonial acknowledgement that has no legal standing, but fulfills his obligation to his council. The Velherathi, whose name she didn't know, she could see a rank insignia now, something high, something that meant this person ran this office. Looked at her for a long moment. Your name, he said. Devi. I'm in Seminar 7. Your field posting. Diplomatic support specialist. Sector operations. That's a very vague classification. Yes, she said. It is. He studied her. His tendrils were doing something she couldn't fully read. She was good at Velherathi chromatic and harmonic communication, but she was not perfect, and then he stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. She came in. She sat at the edge of the table. They pointed her to. She did not take the center seat. She was not here to run the room. That was not the job. The job was the problem. And she laid her journal flat and she said, Okay, Varith. What you need to understand about him is that the Kethvar rite is not ceremonial in the way outsiders interpret ceremonial. It's not performance. It's load-bearing. His political standing within the Old Guard faction depends entirely on being able to demonstrate that he extracted a primacy acknowledgement from any agreement. Without it, he goes home having lost, regardless of what the agreement actually says. So you're not going to talk him out of needing it. You have to give it to him in a form that he can carry home. The room was listening. This was a different kind of room than Seminar 7. These people were not curious about her. They were not sorting her into categories. They were listening to the information the way people listen when the information is what matters, not the source. She felt something loosen in her chest that she had not noticed was tight. The parallel ceremonial acknowledgement I mentioned, subclause 7 in the Aneth Caver resolution. It's not in the official record because it was filed as administrative documentation, not treaty text. That's intentional. It lets the compact claim the words were said, lets the Rim's sovereignty claim no legal concession was made, and both of those things are true simultaneously. She turned to a page in her journal. She had the clause language written from memory. She passed the journal across the table. Something with this structure. The exact wording will need to be adapted for the Shoal Nation ceremonial register, which Vareth's translation team will help with if you approach it as a collaborative effort rather than a concession. The senior Velherathi, she had learned his name by now, Velrather, Director of Active Mediation. She had not recognized his name because the Conclave's mediation directorate wasn't a department she had dealt with directly before, was reading her journal. His tendrils had gone very still. The Rim's sovereignty, he said, still reading. The expansionist bloc. We can't get them to negotiate in good faith if they've already internally committed to breakdown. No, she said. You can't get them to negotiate. You have to make the thing they've already decided to do look more expensive than they've priced it. Through their domestic constituency. Shipping lane security. Outer band. The expansionist bloc's political base is heavily merchant-connected. They've been told that resource seizure will be clean and quick. If the outer band lanes look fragile, if there's uncertainty in the shipping registry, if some of the major route guarantees that currently look stable suddenly look contingent on the resolution outcome, the merchant constituency starts making noise. The expansionists are not ideologues. They respond to economic pressure from their own people. That requires, Velrather said carefully, an action in the shipping registry. Yes, an action you could take. She met his eyes, or the equivalent. Velherathi optical clusters didn't work quite the same way, but the meeting of attention was clear. I know someone in the outer band shipping registry. Yes, you're a student. I was a field operative for 9 years. She said it plainly, not defensively. I have contacts I built in that time. I'm not proposing anything that violates conclave protocols. I'm proposing a legitimate call to a legitimate contact to flag that the outer band route guarantees are contingent on resolution, which is true. They are contingent on resolution. That's not a manipulation. It's making a true thing visible. Velrather looked at her for a long moment. His tendrils did that complex thing again. She watched them and understood about 60% of it, and the 60% she understood was, this is not what I expected, and I am recalibrating. 9 years, he said. Field operative. Support specialist, she said, which was the official term. NF Caver. Among others. What others? She had a list. She did not produce the list. She said, the ones in the record. And some that aren't, because they were resolved before they were recorded, which is the best outcome. That landed in the room in a specific way. She watched it land. The Gethulai across the table. She clocked him as the legal specialist, given the document formats visible on his workstation, shifted in his seat. His bioluminescent skin went a color she didn't have a word for. Not the uncertain green. Something older. Something that, in Gethulai chromatics, she believed was the color of reassessment. The crisis breaks in how long? Velrather asked. Active negotiation needs to start within 72 hours. The compact is watching for a conclave response signal. If we wait, Vareth's faction reads the delay as weakness and hardens. After 72 hours, the window for a soft open closes, and you're in formal framework arbitration, which takes 6 months minimum, during which the Rim Sovereignty's expansionist bloc will have completed the internal political maneuvering they need, and the seizure becomes politically unavoidable. She had not said we before. She said it again now, and noticed she'd said it, and did not take it back. 72 hours, Velrather repeated. Yes. He looked at his colleagues. That Velharathi silent communication that happened in tendrils and harmonics she could only partially read, the frequencies that happened in registers her ears were built to receive, but not fluently decode. Then, he looked at her. The paper journal, he said. You carry your analysis in a paper journal. Yes. Why? She had answered this twice today already. She thought about giving the same answer. She thought about giving a different one. Because it can't be accessed remotely, she said. Because no one reads over your shoulder when you're holding a pen. Because the act of writing something down by hand makes you think about it differently than typing it into a system. Slower, more deliberate. And because she paused. Because the first time I was in a field situation that went badly, it went badly partly because someone read my preliminary analysis off a network device before it was ready to be read, and they acted on it, and the situation she stopped. Paper is private. Paper is mine. The room was quiet. The office hummed. Station machinery. Recycled air. Velrather picked up her journal. Read a few more pages. Turn back to the Kethvar clause language. Put it down. You know, he said, the official conflict resolution curriculum covers the Marin resolution as a solved case. Framework 7 Delta. Clean outcome. I know, Devi said. I sat through that seminar this morning. The geography variable is not in the record. No, it's in a 40-page appendix filed as supplementary administrative documentation that isn't part of the core curriculum. Velrather's tendrils moved. The 60% she could read said, amused. Did you read the appendix? Before I started the program. Of course you did. He stood. Devi, using her name, which among Velharathi was a specific signal, a shift from formal address to something that implied, I am now treating you as a relevant party. We have 72 hours. I have one compact contact who owes the directorate a political favor, a legal specialist who can draft parallel documentation, and now apparently a human student who knows Vareth personally and has a contact in the outer band shipping registry. That's a start, she said. It's a very strange team. Most of the good ones are, she said. It came out of her before she could decide whether to say it. She heard it and thought too much. Too confident. Velrather looked at her. He said, get your contact on the line. Devi reached for her journal. On level 12 in the student residential section, Preth and Voreth and Keth were in their quarters per the advisory, probably studying the conclave's conflict resolution frameworks, probably discussing the crisis in the theoretical terms appropriate to their training level, probably not thinking about the human girl with the pen and the worn jacket. on level 31, the human girl with the pin, and the worn jacket was 53 minutes into a call with her outer band shipping registry contact, working through the specific language of route contingency that would make the uncertainty real without making it threatening. While on a parallel channel, the legal specialist drafted a ceremonial subclause in Shoal Nation Register, while Velrather made the first contact with Vareth's team, dropping a specific phrase, a phrase Devi had, written on a sticky note and passed across the table without explaining where she'd learned it, a phrase in the Keth-Var ceremonial register that meant, "We come to speak of what endures." It was the opening of the rite. Vareth, according to the transcript that came back 20 minutes later, had responded in kind. The window was open. Devi made a second call, turned 2 more pages, wrote 300 words of analysis she didn't share with anyone in the room, but that she would need later when the shape of the solution was clearer and she needed to make sure the shape didn't drift. The station hummed. Somewhere in the outer band, a shipping registry updated 3 route contingency flags. The change was technical, bureaucratic. It would take approximately 18 hours to reach the right desks in the Rim Sovereignty's merchant community. The clock was running. Debbie worked through the night. She drank something from the office's synthesizer that claimed to be coffee and was not coffee but was warm and caffeinated, which was sufficient. She wrote. She called. She passed notes across the table. She answered questions. She asked questions that sometimes made the legal specialist pause and rethink a clause, and she said sorry when that happened, not because she was sorry, but because the dynamic worked better if she appeared apologetic about being right. Around the 14th hour, Velrather came and stood near her end of the table with 2 cups of the not coffee. He set one near her journal. "You're not a support specialist," he said. It wasn't a question. "I was," she said. "Officially." "What were you, unofficially?" She looked at the not coffee cup. It was slightly dented. The station's synthesizer units had a habit of producing slightly malformed containers, a calibration drift that had apparently persisted for several years because no one had prioritized fixing it. She looked at the dent, counted its edges. 3 distinct crease points. "Useful," she said. Velrather made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as a low harmonic. It was, she was fairly sure, the Velharathi equivalent of a laugh. "Go to sleep for a few hours," he said. The compact delegation responds at 6th hour. "I need you sharp." She looked at the work in front of her. Devi. She closed the journal. She slept 4 hours on a couch in the corner of the office, her journal under her arm like a pillow, and when she woke up the compact delegation had responded, and Vareth had used a second phrase from the ceremonial register, and the window was still open, and it was day 113. She made a third call. She turned a page. She did not think about Seminar 7. Not yet. The resolution took 51 hours, not 72. 51, which was either very good or very lucky, and was probably some of both, and Devi had stopped being able to tell the difference between those 2 things years ago, somewhere in the middle of a border arbitration that had lasted 9 days, and ended with a handshake between 2 species who had technically been at war for longer than humanity had possessed writing, and she'd been 26 years old and so tired she couldn't feel her legs, and she'd thought then, luck runs out. You have to build the skill deep enough that luck only has to carry you the last few steps. The ceremonial subclause was the key. It almost always was in Shoal Nation negotiations. Vareth received it at the 41st hour, reviewed it with his council overnight, and returned it at the 47th hour with 2 linguistic modifications that were entirely ceremonial and legally empty, and which Debbie had predicted he would request, and which she had already prepared acceptance language for, and which the Rim Sovereignty's delegation accepted without reading closely enough to notice what they were accepting, because by the 47th hour the outer band shipping contingency flags had filtered through to exactly the merchant constituencies Debbie had targeted, and the noise coming from that direction had made the Rim Sovereignty's expansionist bloc very suddenly, very interested in a clean resolution rather than a protracted breakdown. The signing happened in the diplomatic hall on level 40. Debbie was not there. She was on level 12, in her quarters, asleep. She had gone back when Velrather told her to. She had handed over her journal to be copied. A specific selection of pages, the ones containing the analysis frameworks she'd built over 9 years, and the Kethvar clause language, and the shipping contingency methodology. And then she'd said, "I need my journal back." And he'd said, "Of course." And she'd said, "Today." And he'd said, "Within the hour." And it had been returned within the hour, which improved her opinion of him considerably. She slept for 11 hours. She woke to the station no longer being on elevated alert. She lay in the bunk for a while and listened to the hum of things returning to normal, and felt, as she always did after this, a specific exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the particular cost of sustained concentration on problems that have real consequences, the way a long-distance swimmer feels after crossing something, not injured, just temporarily hollowed out. Then she got up and went to Seminar 7. It was Velsharth's session today, not Sethera's. He was covering the historical record of the Shoal Nation disputes, which had unexpected timeliness given the past 51 hours, and he was doing it well. He was a good teacher, she thought, precise without being rigid, willing to let the class find the shape of the argument rather than handing it to them. She sat in the third row. She opened her journal. Preth was looking at her. Vorth, too. Keth's amber carapace was turned in her direction. There was something different in the quality of the looking. The station news had reported on the resolution, brief and technical, the way the station news always covered diplomatic outcomes, Shoal Nation Compact, and Rim Sovereignty Reach Preliminary Agreement. Conclave mediation, directorate credits, collaborative framework approach. The way station news always covered these things. Institutional language, no names, no details, the story of the outcome without the story of how it happened. But the station was not large. Word moved in a station the way water moves, not always directly, but always downhill. Something had reached level 12. Some texture of information. Enough to make Preth look differently. Velsharth was talking about the Marin conflict resolution. Framework 7 Delta. The class was engaged. It was a good session. Devi was writing. The human was present during the crisis response. Preth said, quietly, during a pause in the discussion when Velsharth had asked the class to consider a practice problem. Quiet enough to be a private observation rather than a public statement. Directed at Vorth, mostly, not quite, aimed away from Devi either. "I heard something like that," Vorth said. Vorth's skin was flickering an uncertain, slightly warm color. Not the cool, uncertain green. Warmer. The chromatic shift that, in Githalai, meant, "I am updating a prior belief, and I am not entirely comfortable with it." She was on level 31, Preth said. During restricted access. During restricted access, Preth confirmed. He paused, and after she was there, things resolved. The directorate resolved it, Vorth said. With her. Preth's tendrils, he had small secondary tendrils, not the full array of Elharathi. He was a half-cultural cross, his heritage ran mixed, move in a way that was not quite skepticism and not quite the opposite of skepticism. Velrather's team. With her. Devi was writing. She was writing notes on Velsharth's analysis of the Marin case, specific to the geography variable question, and she was not participating in the quiet conversation or left, and she was also not participating in it. She was letting it happen in the way you let weather happen when you're standing near a window, aware of it, not trying to change it. Keth's carapace shifted. The amber deepened slightly. She knew the compact's lead negotiator, Keth said. Not question. More like testing a sentence to see if it felt true. Personally. Apparently. She was a support specialist. That's what the record says. Keth clicked his speaking apparatus once. A short, sharp sound that in Marin indicated, "I am revising my assessment." It was a sound that took a certain kind of intellectual honesty to make, because it meant admitting the prior assessment was wrong, and Marin academic culture did not do this easily. Young scholars especially. The click cost him something. Devi kept writing. Velsharth paused the practice problem and looked up. He'd heard something, maybe the click, maybe the quality of the class's attention shifting. His gaze moved across the room and landed, briefly and without particular expression, on Devi. He said, to the class at large, the Marin conflict, the official resolution. Any observations on long-term stability? Several students offered thoughts. The resource partition, the enforcement mechanisms, the monitoring protocols established post-signing. Then, Velsharth said, the geography variable, the eastern tributary. Does anyone want to speak to how that failure was eventually addressed in subsequent framework revisions? Silence. Devi looked up from her journal. Velshareth was looking at her, not with the quality of look that was curious about the animal. With the quality of look that means, I am asking because I believe you know. She did not want to answer in a way that made it a performance. She didn't want the class watching her have a moment. She thought about how to say the thing plainly without making it more than it was. The Concordance updated Framework 7 Delta in the 83rd cycle, she said. Added an environmental instability clause that requires both parties to designate a shared monitoring body for any resource geography that's subject to natural variation over a period of 40 cycles or longer. It wasn't publicized widely because it was framed as a technical amendment, not a policy change. Most curriculum materials use the original framework. She paused. The monitoring body provision is actually the more important half of the framework now. The petition itself was always the weaker part. Silence. Not the silence of mockery. Not the silence of a room indulging a curiosity. The silence of a room where someone has just made a precise and useful observation, and the room is integrating it. Velshareth said, "How do you know about the 83rd cycle amendment?" "I was deployed in the region when it was being drafted," she said. "Support specialist work. I read the working drafts." She said it so plainly. Support specialist work. Like that explained it. Like that was the whole story. Ket's carapace made the clicking sound again. Shorter this time. Almost involuntary. Velshareth held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for the academic exchange, and then he moved on, smoothly, the way a good teacher moves on, giving the class time to absorb something without making an event out of it. Debbie looked back at her journal. Her pen moved. After class, she was 3 steps into the corridor when she heard Velshareth behind her. "Debbie." She stopped. He fell in a step beside her. He was tall. Velharathi tended toward height, and his tendrils were in the relaxed configuration, not formal. Off-the-record communication. She recognized it. "Velrather called me this morning," he said. She said nothing. "He said you were in his office for most of the last 50 hours. I'm sorry I missed yesterday's session," she said. He made a sound. Not quite the harmonic laugh. Something drier. "That's not what I was going to say." They were in the corridor now, other students flowing around them, and he spoke quietly enough that this was between them. "He said you knew Vareth, that you drafted the ceremonial clause." "I contributed to it," she said. "Velrather's team, Devi." She stopped. He was looking at her with the specific Velharathi expression she associated with people who are about to stop being polite about something, and she appreciated it. She genuinely did. She had spent enough time in rooms where no one stopped being polite that directness felt like a gift. "The NF-Caver resolution," he said. Subclause 7. There's no human name anywhere in that document. It was classified for 6 years. It was declassified as part of the standard 10-year review. I read the full file last night. She said nothing. The subclause was introduced by a human support specialist attached to the negotiating team. The notes on the clause's development credit the specialist as the sole author of the mechanism. He paused. The file doesn't give the name. The support specialist requested anonymity. The request was granted. She looked at the corridor wall. It was the same material as every corridor on every Velharathi station she'd ever been in. Slightly curved, slightly luminescent, carrying that faint mineral smell. She had been on 7 stations in 9 years. They all smelled like this. There were other things in that declassified file, Velshareth said. The Rim Station siege, 7 years ago. The hegemony border arbitration. The Compact's internal succession crisis in the Fourth Rim. The one the Conclave officially played no part in because it was classified as an internal matter, but which was resolved without escalation because someone was in a room somewhere saying the right things to the right people at the right time. She looked at him. "The pattern," he said, "is very consistent. Outcomes. No names. Clean results." He held her gaze. "The Conclave's mediation directorate has a term for it. Informally. Operations that work like that, where the process is invisible and the result is all that's visible." He paused. "They call it ghost resolution." She had not heard that term used about her work before. Someone in the directorate had apparently named the pattern and not told her. "Velrather," she said. "He coined it, yes." Velshareth's tendrils shifted. The 60% she could read said something that was not amusement and not quite something else either, recognition, maybe. The specific quality of recognizing something larger than you had been expecting. He also said that he wants you officially attached to the directorate during the remainder of your program. Not as a student observer. as a contributing analyst. She looked at him. You'd still attend the seminars, he said. The credentialing requirement stands. But your work in the directorate would be recorded as part of your track record. Official. Name. He paused. He said, and here's something in his tendrils shifted, a quality she didn't have language for exactly, but that felt like he was being careful about how he phrased the next part. He said that the conclave had been asking for several years why human diplomatic operations had such clean outcomes with such minimal official footprint, and that he thought he might have found the answer, and it was sitting in the third row of Seminar 7 writing notes in a paper journal. The corridor hummed. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about Preth asking, who would accept mediation from human? She thought about Keth explaining that humans had no track record, no standing, no precedent. She thought about the 83 days before this one, sitting in the third row, writing in the margins, being a curiosity. She thought about the Aneth Caver, the Rim Station siege, the 6 other things that weren't in any record anywhere. The 2 things that were in the record, but didn't have her name on them. She thought about the field, the way the field felt, the specific weight of a problem that is real, where real people are waiting for something, and you're in a room trying to find the shape of the solution before the window closes. She thought about how much she had missed it. The sitting in the third row had been harder than she'd let herself admit. She thought about what it would mean to have it again. Officially. Named. You want the paper trail? She said. Yes. Because the ghost resolution pattern, however effective, isn't scalable, Velsharth said, or transferable, or teachable in any formal sense. If you're not in the room, the methodology is lost. He paused. He wants to know what you know. Formally. She looked at her journal. There was an irony here that she could appreciate. 9 years of deliberate anonymity. 9 years of choosing the mechanism that worked over the mechanism that got you credit. Building the methodology in the margins of paper journals that no one could access remotely, that no one read over her shoulder, that kept the work safe and private and effective and completely, entirely invisible. And now Velrather wanted her to teach it, wanted to put her name on it, wanted to make the ghost visible. I'll think about it, she said. Velsharth nodded. He'd expected that. He was already turning to leave. Then he stopped. The students, he said. Preth, Voreth, Keth. They're not. They didn't mean to be unkind. They're applying the models they've been given. The models don't have humans in them yet. I know, she said. They'll learn. She looked at the journal in her hands. The rubber band. The worn edges. The weight of it, which was exactly right, the same weight it had been for 9 years because she kept finding the same size journals, a habit that had started as practicality and become something else. That's what I'm here for, she said. Right? To be learned from. She didn't make it sharp. It wasn't. It was just true, and true things had a weight of their own that didn't need sharpening. Velsharth's tendrils moved in the complex configuration she still only 60% understood, and then he walked away, and she was alone in the corridor. She opened her journal, found a fresh page, wrote Day 114. Then, Velrather wants to put my name on it. She held the pen still. She thought about Vareth, who was probably on a transport back to Shoal Nation space right now, who would tell his council that he had secured the primacy acknowledgement, who would believe that, and also not be wrong to believe it because the subclause had said the words, and the words had been real. She had meant them to be real. That had been the point. Give Vareth something true to carry home. She thought about the outer band shipping routes, which were already stable again, the contingency flags already resolved, the merchant constituencies already satisfied, the whole machinery already folded back into the ordinary flow of commerce, as if the last 51 hours had been a routine administrative matter. She thought about the Rim Sovereignty's expansionist bloc, who were going to be very frustrated in their next internal meeting when they tried to explain how the seizure they had already approved had somehow become politically untenable, and who would not be able to trace it cleanly because the thing that had made it untenable had been the visibility of a vulnerability they already had, and you couldn't be angry at someone for pointing at a real thing. She thought about all of it. The 9 years. The clean results. The unmarked files. She wrote, the frameworks are built for the conflicts we've already seen. The useful part of the job is the ones we haven't. She looked at that. She wrote, if I teach it, other people could do it too. When I'm not in the room. She looked at that. She wrote, that's better. She closed the journal, put the rubber band back, stood in the corridor for a moment longer, and the station hummed its ordinary hum, recycled air and machinery and 47 species going about their days. And she thought about the meeting she'd need to have, the documentation she'd need to write, the part where her name would be on things, and the work would be less invisible. And that was a change, and change was fine. Change was fine. She had changed entire regions. She could handle being seen. She walked back to Seminar 7. She was 8 minutes early. She sat in the third row. She opened her journal, found a page she'd written on months ago. The preliminary analysis of a Shoal Nation crisis that no one had asked her for. The one she'd built in the margins because the problem was there, and she was there, and that was what you did with problems when you saw them. And she read through it, checking her logic, noting where she'd been right, and where she'd been right for the wrong reasons, and where she'd been wrong and needed to understand why. Preth arrived. Voreth. Keth. They took their seats. Keth looked at her once, briefly, and his amber carapace didn't shift to anything dramatic. Just settled into something thoughtful. Something that was in the process of becoming a different thing than it had been 2 days ago. The human was up all night, Preth said quietly. Not to mock. Something closer to observation. Almost tentatively, something closer to respect, though he wasn't quite ready to land there yet. And that was fine. Landing took time. 2 nights, she said, without looking up. Preth's secondary tendrils made a small movement. Was it the resolution? Was it? She looked up. Was it hard? He finished. She thought about the question. She thought about what hard meant in the context of 51 hours of parallel channel negotiation and ceremonial clause drafting and shipping registry contingency work and not sleeping and drinking synthesized not coffee out of a dented cup. No, she said. Then, well, the Kethvar subclause had a tricky tonal register. Vareth as counsel is very sensitive to linguistic register. It took a few drafts. Preth stared at her. Other than that, she said, no. She went back to her journal. She could feel Preth looking at her for a long time after that. She could feel the quality of the looking changing, the sorting into categories shifting, the categories themselves growing uncertain around the edges. She could feel the room doing what rooms did when something they'd assumed was settled turned out to be less settled than they'd thought. She kept writing. Not notes on the curriculum. Not margin analysis of framework failure modes. She was writing a proposal. Formal, structured, the way the directorate would receive it. A methodology document. She had been building it for years in fragments and margins, and now she was writing it whole, writing it as a thing that could be read and applied and taught, writing it with her name on it. The methodology for the conflicts we haven't seen yet. Sethera came in, and the seminar began, and Devi kept writing, her pen moving steadily across the page, the class moving around her like weather she was familiar with. She was in the third row. She was, for the first time in several months, exactly where she was supposed to be. The station hummed. 47 species. The conclave's great machinery. The files on level 31, where 3 new territorial disputes were sitting in the active queue, classified as monitored low priority, and one of them was going to escalate within 2 standard years if no one intervened, and she had already identified the intervention points, and now she would write them down in a document with her name on it, and give it to people who could act on it when the window opened. She turned a page. The pen moved. The journal, worn and rubber-banded and entirely non-networked and belonging to no system and no database and no remotely accessible record, filled another page with her careful, deliberate handwriting. Somewhere in the outer band, the shipping lanes were clear. Somewhere in Shoal Nation space, Vareth was telling his council that the words had been said, and they had been, and they were true. Somewhere in the rim sovereignty, a merchant constituency was satisfied, and an expansionist bloc was frustrated, and neither of them knew why, quite. Somewhere in the conclave's official record, a resolution was logged under collaborative framework approach, and the resolution held, and would hold because the geography variable had been priced in, and the ceremonial variable had been priced in, and the domestic political variable had been priced in, because someone who had spent 9 years building a methodology in the margins of paper journals had taken everything she knew and put it into the shape of the solution before the window. Closed. No name in the file. Not yet. That was changing now. Debbie turned another page. Wrote the date at the top. Wrote a heading. On the resolution of conflicts for which no framework yet exists. Below that, her name. Below that, a sentence. The frameworks are built for the conflicts we've already seen. What follows is for the ones we haven't. She underlined it. She kept writing.